Hello and good morning, everyone. This is Brandon, Brand Muffin, Muffin Man, whatever. I'm going to try to keep this succinct as possible, but as you probably see with all my comments, I can ramble. So, apologies if that happens. Anyway, focus here. I'm going to be looking at just the SmiteFire webpage as a whole and go through some of the things that I look for in a build and why I would deem it a good or a bad build, etc., etc. I am going to be talking in my sexy voice, aka wife and children are asleep, so I gotta be quiet or I'm gonna get in trouble. Haha. Anyway, so I'm on the main SmiteFire homepage. I'm not gonna really go through like everything that's going on here, but I'll probably just get right into some of the builds. I have some open just as examples, so we'll start. Firstly, shameless self-promotion, an in-depth discussion on item choices by me. And if you haven't seen it before, I do highly suggest it. I've taken a lot of time to explain a lot of different parts of the mechanics of the game that people may or may not really think in depth about. So I spent a lot of time on discussion on individual components and other aspects, and you should be able to get something pretty decent out of it. Anyway, we will just continue on from there. We'll go to my buddy MJ's Nike build, and I do consider this to be a pretty solid build. And so let's just start looking at why. Firstly, I talk about movement speed. Movement speed is a key item for basically every god in the game in basically every mode. And so it's nice here. You can see right in the front page, he's got his item selections. He gives options, which is nice. Depending on how you're going to play her, you may appreciate she's got a pretty strong early game with her rend. And so, items like Warrior Dobby are great. Give you a high amount of physical power, get your movement speed that you just sort of need for everything. Whether it's, you're backing and you got to get back to your lane, you're rotating, you're chasing, you're escaping. Movement speed is just unfortunately key. It's a required item. You're sort of stuck choosing it, but you need to choose one. The other choice he has here, Reinforced Greaves, and that is a nice tanky item if you find that you have to play her, or tanky if you're facing an enemy or enemies with DOT or ticking abilities that do multiple hits in that one ability. Then you can find a lot of use out of Reinforced Greaves. Anyway, I'm not going to go into all the details. You can see, you can pull up all of the stats yourself. But what do we see here? One of the biggest things that you really want to look for are options. You want to look for options. There is no one set build for almost any god. The closest that you're going to find there is going to be an ADC, Hunter. Hunter builds are pretty set and straightforward from item 1 to 6. There is some variation, but the items are often very similar. In this kind of situation, you get to see that, hey, here's an option if you want some physical protection and CDR. Here's a universal option for equal protections and health. Genji's is sort of like a magical protection variant of Breastplate of Valor. And then you've got Gladiator Shield, which is a bridge item. Gladiator Shield can actually be very, very effective. Bridge items overall can be very, very effective in the early game. Look at the cost. 1,700 gold versus 22, 2350, 23. When you are able to get cheaper items, you can get them online earlier, which means you get the full stats from the item, and you can have at least a temporary advantage over opponents that are going for something more expensive. it's things like these. You want to be able to see that there are options. And okay, so before I go any further, options. Does he explain this type of thing in his guide? I mean, there's a lot of great BB coding. BB coding makes it more pleasant, a more pleasant experience overall, but it's not necessary. But this is very, very nice. He's put a lot of work into it. Got combo information, and look, even here he is explaining all the different choices that he's provided. He's explaining what they do, why you might get it, things like that. Hey, here's Gladiator Shield, nice bridge item. You can visit these guides if you'd like, but just sort of pointing out, when you see options, and especially if you're a newer player, you sort of want to understand, sort of learn why you might choose these items. I understand it'd be really nice for newer players just to say, like, okay, here are your items 1 through 6, but the game is just way more complex than that. And so the more you're able to get some explanations, and the more time you're dedicated to actually reading those types of things, the faster you're gonna build your base of understanding and improve on at least the build side of things. Anyway, I'll just sort of do a quick overview of the rest of this general build. We see that there are other builds here, but in a case like this, you get to see that, hey, Nike is an ability-based god. You may or may not know that, but you'll see strong CDR items sort of throughout most of the choices, and it has other stats that are sort of nice in the early game. A little bit of flat physical penetration. Flat penetration is always good earlier in the game. The later the game gets, item 5 or item 6, you see Titan's Bane. Titan's Bane is a % penetration item, which makes it more and more effective the more physical protections an enemy has. So you want to see % pen items usually later in the build rather than earlier when more protections are built. And then I'm not going to go through all the rest of the options, but suffice to say, I consider these options generally very good. He covers a lot of different things. He covers some counter building, etc., anti-healing options, things like that. So that's Newbie MJ's Nike guide. Again, consider it a pretty strong one. If you'd like to check it out, go for it. Next one, let's look at our buddy Bernardo Zomers. Bernardo. Yeah, not just Bernard. Got it. Anyway, this Emir guide was one of the front runners for the Emir contest at the end of 2016. And if we look at this is the general support build. And let's just, say, hey, this is pretty much going to be what you might see in the Conquest mode. It's not initially stated here. I do like to see when you call out which mode this is for. Oh, never mind. Haha, check this out. See, right in the title. Conquest Guide. Nice and straightforward. There we go. Anyway, starter items. I've talked about starter items. You're usually going to want to see starter items in longer modes like Conquest, maybe sometimes in Siege. Modes where the matches last longer, you spool gold more slowly. It's 3 gold every second or so in Conquest, compared to, what is it, 8 in Arena, I think. So there's a big difference in how much gold you gather per minute, and it makes a difference in how quickly you can get your builds up. So Watcher's Gift here is a great support item. It is almost an essential support item these days. Just, going through again, you see that movement speed is a first item. It doesn't always have to be a first item, depending on the god and the role, but for the majority of them, it's usually going to be one of the better choices. Again, the movement speed is just key for getting around, and a lot of times you're going to get a lot of stats, a lot of really good stats for pretty low price. 1,500 gold here gets you all of that, which is really pretty nice. In a support role, we like to see aura items in patch 4.11. Unfortunately, we've got a little bit of a nerf to Sovereignty and to Gauntlet of Thebes, but I think they're still viable. So you get to see some options here. These are all good because they protect you and they protect your nearby teammates. Sovereignty is by far the most important of those aura items, and if you're facing, at least 2 to 3 physical gods on the enemy team, keep in mind that physical protection is generally more important than magical protection. Physical protection not only protects you against physical gods, but it protects you against all minions, whether they're lane minions, jungle minions, or objectives, towers, phoenixes, fire giant, gold fury, etc., etc. Physical protection is really, really nice. Sovereignty is very, very nice. It is still a very strong item. Definitely suggested. And you just see again, you see a lot of different options going on. A lot of like truer protection items for supports. A lot of time they have a lot of CC crowd control in their kits. It's one of their key stats, and so you're going to see some items that sort of enforce that with their CDR. And then he even gives some offensive-minded defense items. Dynasty Plate, you see it's got some power and some flat pen. With Void Stone, you see you got some power again and some protection reduction in an aura form. These are good earlier game offensive defensive items. Anyway, I won't go through all the rest of these, but it's good to see that you get options. And again, you go down and you look, all this other information, but hey, do we get explanations on items? Yes, we do. And I would say generally they're probably very good. I'm not going to go through and read these right now, but I have read it in the past, and they are good explanations. So anyway, these are generally things that you're looking to see in the guides that you're going to read, and just sort of determining on a face value if it looks like it's worth reading or not. We'll go to our buddy, best minion ever, Marky. And this guide has been around forever, since before I even joined SmiteFire, so this has been around a long time. And he is, if you see here, he's starting the update. He's been gone for a while, but he's back. Welcome back. And so he's going through, and hopefully we'll see a nice new revamped version pretty soon. But in the meantime, his presentation is a little bit different. In this build 1, it's not builds. It's actually just, hey, here are the items that you might choose depending on the situation. Offensive items, defensive items, etc., etc. And then he goes into the actual builds themselves. To me, let's look at a couple of these really, really quickly. Build number 2 is called the race car build. Why is it called the race car build? He's got a lot of movement speed in here. He's got 18% movement speed from Warrior Tabi. He's got 10% movement speed from Stone Cutting Sword, and he's got another 10% from Hasten Vitalis. I'd probably say this is not the type of build that I would gravitate toward. I would probably say it's more along the lines of this one. Not to say that build 2 is bad, and I will never, ever, ever be anything close to as good as at Naja as Marky is, but anyway. The assassin build. Let's take a consideration of the god himself. He's got a unique ult that automatically crits if you time it properly, which is pretty easy to do. And so hence you see a Deathbringer, which I, in my little breakdown, I know I said you usually don't get Deathbringer before, say, item 4 or 5 at the minimum, but in a case like this, Deathbringer automatically is going to provide his ult with a significant amount more damage. So that's why we see it so early here. It is very expensive, 3,200 gold, which is a lot. And so understand that when you're building something like this, you're going to have a pretty big gap when you're, going through the game. Other people that you're playing against are going to probably have their third item working on their fourth before you even finish Deathbringer. So you just sort of play to those strengths or weaknesses and play a little safer until you got something online. In any case, Naja is an ability-based god, so we see an early Jotun's Wrath for the 20% CDR, which is huge. This is very, very common for ability-based assassins to go Jotun's Wrath second. And then, the Deathbringer, and this one has some movement speed. It doesn't come from the other choices, Stone Cutting Sword or Hasten Fatalis from build number 2. But Heartseeker, I think, is actually a very, very solid choice here, just because you're gonna be basic attacking jungle camps and whatnot here and there. So you're gonna build up your stacks. And if you look at this passive, once you get full stacks, your next ability, if it hits in an enemy god, gives you bonus damage equal to 100% of your physical power, which is a nice little boost. Anyway, so you're seeing a lot of things going on here, and this is a pretty straightforward build. There's very little on the situational type of thing, but that's pretty common for an assassin, especially ones that are trying to max out their damage and aren't building bruisery. So anyway, and again, we see, this Titan's Bane is last. Titan's Bane would be okay in the 5th position, 6th position. You're usually going to see percent pen items later. That's what you want to see, usually. Anyway, that's Marky's guide. He knows what he's talking about. So I just sort of wanted to go to a couple of builds that I looked at in advance. I'm not going to give out names or usernames or anything, but I just want to show you why, looking at some of these, why I would consider them to be weaker builds. What's going on here? So, Xbalanque. This is Xbalanque. He's a hunter. Hunters are not ADCs, hunters are not supports. You're only going to see Watchers on a support. Watchers requires you not to kill minions to get the effect from the passive. An ADC needs to get their last hits, so you should never, ever, ever see Watcher's Gift on a hunter. And he says pick one. Death's Toll is a great one. That's a standard hunter item. So can be Bluestone Pendant, but Death's Toll is perhaps more common for the sustain and everything, but this should just not be an option. In any case, okay, so he's got shoes first, boots, which are good. But one thing don't like to see here, Hasten Fatalis, if you know the stats, no power. Charged bow. What's going on with charged bow? Why not Odysseus bow for 1? So he's halting in the middle of a full item build. This is a tier 2 item, not a full tier 3. And note here again, this item doesn't have power. Usually don't choose 2 items in a row that don't provide power. It just really, really hampers your early game damage, early game wave clear potential, things like that. This is an item that is actually very common on Xbalanque, but it's in the 3.5, 4 position. 3.5 because this isn't complete, right? But it's technically in the 4th position. When you buy stacking items like Transcendence or Devourer's Gauntlet, you don't build it 4th. You need to build it earlier because you need to start building those stacks. Those stacks are sort of required to get a lot of extra effect out of their passives. And they provide, Transcendence, for example, provides a very nice power boost and will help Xbalanque's early game quite a bit. And Transcendence is actually, with Death's Toll and everything, is actually very nice. when you're using Branching Bola. The cost early game isn't much, and if you're hitting the minion waves and using Branching Bola to help clear, you know what? You're going to be cutting pretty even. You're not even going to need that much mana, but you'll want the power from that. In any case, let's just sort of say that Transcendence really needs to be in the second position. And then from there, we're looking at final two options. They're both crit items. I personally don't always like crit items in combination with Transcendence. Just, it makes things difficult. When you've got 3 items being taken up like this, you also need move speed, which is here. You usually want penetration, which there is basically no penetration. This 10 flat penetration is not enough. So you want a good penetration item. Usually it's going to be the Executioner or the Titan's Bane. And then the 6th item, note that we are at the 6th item, he needs some sustain. When you're fighting, exchanging blows, you're going to take damage. You don't want to put yourself in a bad situation by needing to stay out when you're at half health, or backing all the time anytime you take damage just so you don't die. So you need a sustain item, and so when you tie up 3 items just in these types of items, it really prevents you from having a complete build. So that's one of the main reasons I don't like this build overall. And then finally, Deathbringer is not the best first crit item, except in those unique cases like Naja from a little earlier, or some other gods like Artemis, who has some crit built into her kit, things like that. Deathbringer seems like it would provide better DPS, but it does not in comparison to other crit items as a first crit item. You want to see it second. So we would want Malice to be first, but actually we don't even probably want Malice first. Right now, Rage and Wind Demon are actually generally what I would consider to be superior crit items, but the moral here is Deathbringer should usually be the second crit item, not the first. Anyway, that's that build. We'll go on to this Khepri build. And this Khepri build, what's going on here? What's one of the first things that you're going to see here? Well, we're seeing that there's only one build, and it doesn't have any variance. No variance. Here's how you build it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's no flexibility in a build, and if you understand that Khepri is a support, he's a guardian, he needs a variety of options. You never ever build a support one way always. You always need different things. You need to be able to counter build. You need to target the higher threat first, a lot of times with a protection item. That's not necessarily a horrible first protection item, but if we look at the rest of the build, there's a lot to be there's a lot that's lacking. So let's see. First, no options for Shoes, even though Shoes is first, which is nice. And Khepri, like many Guardians, does appreciate CDR. So Shoes of Focus isn't a bad option, but a lot of times, again, you like to see variety, choices, and reasons. You want to see reasons for those choices explained somewhere. This is a killer. This is a killer. Soul Reaver is almost 3,000 gold. It's extremely expensive. Buying it as an early game item, usually not the greatest choice. In addition, Khepri, again, is a support. He's not looked to for damage. He's looked to for his CC, for his control. He can stun. He can grab and pull. And he can ult to save his teammates' lives. He's not looked at for damage. And if we go down here and we look at reasons for Soul Reaver, he's saying this is an interesting choice for some tanks. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. An all damage item, one that I don't use on really any other tanks, which is good. You really shouldn't be using this on Khepri either. Paired with Khepri's 1, however, and your enemy will begin to wonder how they are suddenly at half health. Okay, well, they might be at half health if they were at, 3/4 health already, or something along those lines, but you're not going to get them to half health from friggin' one skill when they're at full health. Let's take a look at this. So I pulled up Smite Builder. It's eliteownage.com Smite Builder. And you can, just create builds and do some comparisons and whatnot. Anyway, I've got a bunch of different builds already set here. I usually do it this way, where I have one squishy with no protection, one bruiser with some protections and some damage, and then Athena right here, which is basically all support items. No real focus on damage, just to see, different levels of protections and health. So if we go back to Khepri, here's that person's build. And Soul Reaver, take a look at level 20. Take a look at what Abduct is going to do. Abduct is, on a really tanky god, is doing 136 damage after mitigations. Activate Soul Reaver, and sure, you know what? That's a pretty substantial number. But again, you are not looked at to do damage. You are there to allow your teammates to do damage and do it safely without needing to worry so much about dying, because you're going to protect them. But even then, 466 damage. She has a base 3,300. That's almost nothing. It just, Soul Reaver is just not a great choice. It just isn't. We look at this Witchblade. We got Witchblade here, and it's another one of those things. Got some health, sure. Got some attack speed. Khepri doesn't need attack speed. Got some movement speed. That's fine. Extra movement speed. Supports can appreciate the movement speed. You can get that from, Traveler shoes instead of Shoes of Focus, or you can get that from other items. Winged Blade is another popular item, and this can be considered a counter item depending, but it's a situational counter item, because what does it do? Basic attacks are cursed. Enemy basic attacks are cursed. They receive reduced healing, so it's an anti-heal item, and it reduces their attack speed, so it's actually anti-heal and anti-attack speed, which is great for basic attacking hunters and basic attacking assassins, and maybe some warriors as well. So this is a decent counter item, but it's very, very situational, and it's usually not one I would generally consider on Khepri unless he really, really needed it. And then he's got, Bulwark's a solid support item. Gem of Isolation. Gem of Isolation is just another one of those. I love the item. I love it. I use it on a lot of gods. I do not use it on somebody like Khepri. Why? It's got this passive that slows enemies hit by damaging abilities for 2 seconds, but guess what? If we're looking at, a level 5 skill, the pull duration is 1.9 seconds. That's pretty much 2 seconds. So the Gem of Isolation effect is going to wear off basically as soon as Abduct wears off, and that doesn't do anything for you. Rising Dawn is basically one of the only ones where it would really be effective, because it doesn't have any slow or anything else on it. So if you are able to hit the enemy, sure, you can get them slower. But hey, guess what? He's also got Solar Flare. It's I think I said stun earlier. It's a root. It stops them from moving for, again, almost 2 seconds. Gem of Isolation, generally do not suggest on Khepri. In any case, I think that sort of covers a little bit of, what I'm looking at when I'm looking at items. I know a lot of this stuff off the top of my head because I'm just extremely familiar with the items, but again, you can be too. It just takes a little bit of time and effort, and reading some things, like the Item Choices Guide and other stuff like that. There's a lot of resources out there, and it's in your best interest, if you want to get better, to be familiar with all the items, understand what's going on with them, why you choose certain items in which order, etc., etc. And as always, I offer my services. If you've got any questions, you are free to ask me and or anybody else on the site. We have a lot of good people that are helpful, willing to help people, willing to help newer players. We like discussion, and so feel free anytime to comment in guides, in forums, personal message, however's most comfortable for you. We are there for you. So, sorry, I rambled a lot. I don't know how long this video really is, but I'm sure it's longer than it needed to be. It wasn't scripted though, so just everything off the top of my head. Hope you get something out of it. If nothing else, you can make fun of my voice, my sexy voice. Yeah, you like it. Anyway, peace out.